revert back to the one.
All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about today is this was prompted last CBUG by discussions about lighting and sky domes, and there's a secret trick that's basically the holy grail of CG nowadays, which is using image-based lighting, or IBL. And what this is you take an image, and it has to be done in a special way that accurately captures all the light data around you. And then you bring this into 3D, and you can use that to light your scene, which is very exciting and pretty cool. So if you want to do this the cheap, dirty way, the first thing you need to know is where to get them and how to set them up. And so most people start this way by looking up how to use this because they hear, oh, holy grail of CG lighting. And they might find something like HDR Labs, which is a really great resource. It's got a tools and tutorial section. PictureNot is very useful. But also it has this smart IBL setting. And first off, if you want, you should just download. You can go to this and click on the SIBL archive. And you can download a lot of these old ones that they have, which are very, very cool. And this actually is designed around a plugin that they use in Maya, which specifically targets several different things. First off, for your background plate, you'll just use a gigantic full-res panorama, but it's not necessarily high dynamic range. And you don't necessarily want high dynamic range for every pixel because that's a gigantic file. So you sort of, for the background image, you just use the high-res version, but not HDR. Then, for your reflections, you use a medium dynamic range one. And so these reflections, or you use a high dynamic range, but at medium resolution. And then you'll get all these sort of highlights on it. And then, lastly, for your shadow casting, which is a much more expensive thing, you use a very low dynamic range, or you use a very high dynamic range, but a low resolution version of this. So you're essentially using a file that's an HDR panorama, and 1 pixel represents the pinprick of sunlight that generates your shadow. But mostly, if you just look at this file, it's going to download, I'll extract it. You'll notice in here we can look at these, and you can see the different file sizes. One is a 3K HDR file, which would be used, again, for the reflections. One is a 140 kilobyte one, which is much smaller, and that's going to be used for the lighting. And then you have this gigantic 8K plate, which is going to be used for the background. And you can see there's a lot of detail in here. And then you have preview and thumbs. And this little IBL file, .ibl, is used by Maya when you're using the Smart IBL plugin to automatically hook it up and get all these working pretty seamlessly. So if you just toss it a file format that has all these naming conventions, it instantly has CG lighting in Maya. Us in the Blender world have recently seen this via Andrew Price, right? BlenderGuru.com. He released a plugin that essentially does the same thing for Blender. What was it?
It was written by Patrick. Do you remember him from the...
Yeah, probably.
He was from SIGGRAPH.
Yeah, Pro Lighting Skies. Basically does the same thing. Costs a bit of money. I think you get a decent amount of HDRs. And then additionally, if you have this little pinprick that represents your light, you can actually have a corresponding sun lamp in 3D that you use. And then your sun is in line with your environment-based lighting. So if you have all this crap, how do you set it up in Blender? Well, I can't do the full thing, but mostly we use it in cycles. So if you have cycles render, and I'll add some more interesting objects really fast, such as a monkey. I'll smooth this monkey. I'll give it a nice shiny cycles material. Shift Z makes this visible. You'll notice that it's a very shiny material, but essentially worthless right now. And the reason for that is because its shininess is reflecting its environment. Its environment is pure gray, so that's what it's going to reflect. So now if I go to the Materials tab, in the node editor, and then the environment tab, I can hit use node, and we can find that file that I downloaded and hook this up and get instantly realistic lighting. Texture, environment lighting. Where is it? Downloads. Arches Pine Tree. Bang. Instantly realistic light.
Add a floor.
Yes, indeed. Add a floor. So if we use the high-res one, but we're going for the one that has this .hdr extension, you'll notice that it's a little better. Now if you shoot these right, you should get a shadow cast. I think we're getting one. I always get this false positive from this light that starts off. And usually we don't. So you might end up doing something like having a sun lamp that you just try and get.
I've always dreamed of seeing an HDR that just works without the additional lights for once.
Well, you can get that. It just takes a lot of work. So if I add a sunlight,
Never seen one, like in any demo anywhere.
I've got a few. I got mine that work. I'll show you. And it casts shadows. It's just super hard to set up. And therein lies the problem with HDR, is how do you shoot these to accurately represent your scene?
And quite often the answer is you don't.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, you can check this stuff by, if you have an image editor, you can turn on View as Render, and that means this image is subject to the changes in lighting under your Scene panel here. So under Scene, I can go to Color Management and adjust the exposure of our overall scene. And you can see that this one is not fully capturing the light value. We can understand that this is the highest range of this photo. We're going to get into some of this under the hood stuff. So this, look at all this white. Clearly we have an accurate shooting of the overexposed version. And down here, we have a pretty light sun still, but not the rest of the scene. However, we can tell that this wasn't shot entirely correct, because eventually if we go dark enough, the sun is darkening while we still have these rays. And if you've truly shot it right, you should just get a pinprick. And it's super hard and not necessarily actually that feasible for modern pipelines to tell people to do this. But I'm really fascinated by it, just for the frontier science of it. So that's what I've been working on a lot. And this, right now, is about where everyone stops in their pursuit of HDR. You understand how to download other people's HDRs off the internet and how to hook it up in 3D. And then you're like, wow, it looks great. That's all I'm ever going to learn about it. And then the problem is you're always using other people's HDRs, and you're also subject to their flaws in shooting. So for instance, this one doesn't necessarily have the full value range of an HDR. Hence, we come to the next part of this, which is how to shoot our own HDRs. So over here I have my camera rig. And I've started trying to document my process. I wrote my first blog entry in probably like a year or something. No, about a month. I'm not blogging as much as I should. Yeah, there's an October blog entry and then a January one. But I started trying to document my process. So I wanted to write a larger idea of how this works, and also have it be at a level where if you don't work for a giant studio shooting all these maps, you can jump in as a one-person, one-stop shop. So the first thing I have is the equipment list. And you are probably going to drop a little bit of money. My website, by the way, is ogbog.net, if you're curious. Again, not very often updated. So the first thing you need is a full-frame DSLR. And what I mean by full frame is that it's not cropping. If you have a Dizzler, I call them Dizzlers, just work with what you have. So for instance, this one does have a crop factor. It has a crop factor of 1.56. And what that means is if it takes a picture, that picture then goes into the camera and it says, okay, I only can see this much of it. So So I'm losing a lot of the shot outside of there. So if you drop a little money, you can get a better camera. And at some point, I'm probably going to trade this in for the next version up. But honestly, it's not too bad of an issue. And you work with what you have. And if you're trying to do this on a budget, you don't necessarily need a new camera. So this camera probably cost me like $1,200, I think, at the time I got it. And I don't know. You probably have a camera lying around, hopefully. The next big hit on expenditure is going to be your lens. So this is a fisheye 8mm, and it's very expensive. And the reason that you want to go with a fisheye is because we're trying to capture a panorama. So, people who have been coming to CBUG far too long have probably seen demos where I use a different lens for this. And here's the problem that you have. I started off shooting this with the first lens that came with my camera, and it was actually a long-range telephoto lens, which meant that it captured way far off. And so if I wanted to shoot in HDR, that meant I had to have thousands of little pictures going this way. So I bought a better lens, which was a 10 to 18mm one. And what that meant is I could capture a span of about this much. So to shoot a panorama, what that meant is if I did 9 angles in a circle like this, then that's one angle. And then I could move this to be pointed upward, and I'd shoot 9 more angles, and then downward, and I'd shoot 9 to get my sky and my foreground. So that's 27 total angles that I have to shoot. And every time you're shooting this, you're not just shooting an angle. What you're doing is shooting brackets of angles. So I'm actually shooting multiple exposures, and I'm shooting it in camera raw. A camera raw file is going to be like 20 megabytes. If you're shooting 7 brackets, that's like 150 megabytes just for one angle. So to do a full panorama with a lens that's not fisheye means that you're generating like 3 gigs very, very fast. And it's just not very useful. So instead, what I recommend is if you're going to shell out for money, shell out for a fisheye lens. They're like $800. The 10 to 18mm that I suggested, or that I started off with, is $300. It was well worth the extra $500 if you're trying for an HDR pipeline. And again, most of you probably are not going to, but if you're ever curious about this stuff, that's sort of where you're going. Make your work pay for it. So again, this is a crop camera. It's cropping. But this lens means that instead, as a fisheye, and it's not cropping as much when it's, your camera is generally a rectangle, right? So the rectangle is like this. So it's not cropping the top and the bottom, but it is cropping on the sides. Even though I have that crop factor, I only have to shoot 4 total angles, and then I'm done. That's the main savings that you're looking for with a fisheye lens. Other things you have to buy are a tripod. You can get tripods at Goodwill for like $5. The best thing I would recommend is get one that has a ball socket pivot point, because then it's going to be easier to level it out. A pano head is the next kind of big expenditure. This is the cheapest option, but it works really well. It's like $99. But you guys have seen in previous CBUGs, I totally had a rig that I made for $3 at a hardware store out of 2 wooden shims. It was terrible, but it worked. So you don't necessarily have to spend tons of money to do this. This, from the camera down, you can get a lot of stuff for probably $40. The other thing I recommend, and again, this is all on my blog if you're trying to go to a Christmas wish list right after this, is DSLR controller. And this is an application that modifies how your camera works with firmware. So imagine if you have a really powerful computer, but the manufacturer shipped it with MS Paint, and they lock it down so you can never install Photoshop or Krita or some more powerful programming to Paint. That sucks because you have the capability to do it under the hood. It's just that they're not letting you do that. Well, that's kind of where firmware is. It's stuff that you can't touch that's inside the camera. And so the firmware of this camera means that I can set it up to shoot 3 brackets. We'll get into brackets later. That's not a lot. But imagine if I could just install a program on there and suddenly have 1,000,000 brackets. That would be great. They don't let you do that. There is a program called Magic Lantern. And this is an open source project that would let you modify your cameras.
They always tell you it could fry your camera.
Yes, it could fry your camera. And this is why I recommend DSLR controller over this. This is open source and free. But the thing is, you have to stick it in your memory card and actively void your warranty on your camera. By contrast, if you have an iPhone or Android phone, which most of us do, you can download an app called DSLR Controller for $7, I think it is. You then go on Amazon and you buy a very strange unitasking cord, which is a micro USB, aka the little camera hookup, to a mini USB, which is what we have on an Android phone. Or if you're using an iPhone, it would be a micro USB to an Apple connector, whatever that is.
Well, the phones take micro USB.
Apples are different.
Yeah, no, they take micro, not mini.
Apple has a unique thing that's
No, but your phone.
Oh yeah,
Android.
this is the mini, whatever the Android side is. So the main thing that's good about this is the change to the stuff is on your phone, not on the camera. So you're not voiding your warranty. And the other thing that's good is it's actually preferable, in my opinion, to Magic Lantern, because when you push buttons on your camera, that's adding camera shake, and it's going to mess up your shot, even with a 3-second delay. By instead using this, we're not going to have that problem. I don't know where I plug it in though. Alright, now I don't even know where my camera plug in. Where'd it go?
Controller for the camera.
Oh, here it is. Dizzler. Does anyone else call it Dizzler?
No.
I keep trying to make this happen, and it's not happening. So the point is, you plug it in here, and you plug this into your phone. DSLR controller will automatically launch, and I think it will. I think the camera has to be on. And hey, you hear that now? So now I get this nice little window pop up. And so there's two benefits. I push a button on my phone, and therefore the camera setup doesn't wiggle. And number two, I can hack that firmware and say things like, instead of having 3 limited brackets, I can have 9 brackets. And I can also bracket things that they normally don't allow for, such as I can bracket my ISO or my, I don't know or so on and so forth. So that's the majority of your hardware stuff that you're going to need. And the last one you might have to consider is neutral density gels, which are just like tiny little squares, basically sunglasses for your camera. If you don't have a fisheye, you can actually buy a lens that you screw on. What's up?
Won't a neutral density gel kind of mess up the accuracy of your...
Yes, it will. And so this is sort of the sort of tricky pipeline that you're going for. What you end up doing is the neutral density gels let you shoot something that's very, very difficult to capture, which is the brightness of the sun. Your camera on the darkest settings will probably not be able to see it. So.
Yes, but there's a difference between neutral density and darkening, because neutral density does those strange
Neutral density, in theory, it tries to leave color unmodified and instead just darken things. And this is sort of where you see a lot of bad reviews for neutral density filters. A bad one will actually colorize the image, and it's good to just try shooting it. Shoot one. First off, they end up being very mathematically precise for camera stuff. So you can, like, say it goes down 3 stops of light, right? So shoot one with the neutral density, go up 3 stops of light, shoot again, and compare and contrast the color change. I do get a little bit of them. But the thing is, the main thing we're trying to capture is not necessarily the color of the sun. We're trying to capture the value of it at the darkest range. So what you end up doing, in my opinion, and this is still something I'm working on, you add neutral density filters, you shoot the sun, you take them out, you shoot the sun again, you take another one out, you shoot the sun, and then after that you have no neutral density filters in your camera, at which point you shoot from the darkest point of your camera to the, whatever the highest range of your sensor says. Does that make sense? Is anyone following this? This is totally over your heads. I don't know.
What are you doing with neutral density?
What?
What are you doing with the neutral
Say that one more time.
What are you doing with the neutral density?
So the neutral density filter essentially acts like a sunglass. You can see the basic concept here. This is an overexposed image. With the neutral density filter, it lowers it. It's important to also know some basic camera ideas. So cameras, let's just whiteboard this. Right? Cameras deal with 3 different things that affect how light or dark they are. You got aperture. Who's right AP for that? You have exposure and ISO. What are these 3 things? Aperture. Dean.
It's a little circular opening inside the lens, and it can expand and contract.
Like a sphincter.
Yeah. So your camera has blades, and they're basically all going like this. And if they go in more, they're letting less light in. Therefore, the image is darker. If they spread, they let more light in. Huh?
It mimics the iris of your
Yeah, it's just like how your eye gets really big when it's dark and shrinks when it's light. What's cool about this is as these blades go like this, that's how you get the shape of bokehs, which is the bouquets. The bouquets, which are the little sort of light cookies that you see when you're driving at night with your glasses off. Don't do that, but
Or the thing that J.J. Abrams likes.
yeah. So if you're shooting with a camera that has 6 blades that are shrinking the aperture, you're going to get a hexagonal bouquet.
Okay.
I'm also going to point out now that exposure, I think, is the wrong term for the thing in the middle.
It's like
Shutter speed.
it's shutter speed. Yes, shutter speed. SS.
There's some negative connotations with SS.
Yes, SS. There is some. So shutter speed is how fast or slow your camera is going. And so your camera basically, it has its eyes closed and it says, I open my eyes and then I close my eyes. If it's open for a very short amount of time, that means less light entered your eyeball. If it's open for a long time, more light enters. So the longer you stare at the sun, the more your eye burns away, right?
Depends on the lens too.
And then lastly, your ISO. There's sort of some under the hood gobbledygook about how much on the atomic level of your sensor, how much light it's visible, and like it's sort of like an atomic, like they force feed it. Yeah, they force feed it to be more sensitive, and that's the one that you should modify last.
It's easier to understand as the camera's overall calibrator that calibrates all the other settings.
Yeah. And this is where noise comes from in an image, basically. So if you have these 3 things, you can put any of them into this basic idea of how light or dark something is. And this is called a stop. And a stop is basically, let's say we have stop number 1. A stop that's above it has twice as much light. A stop that's below it is half as much light. Or logarithm.
I've always wondered how they define a stop.
Yeah, that's what it is. So if you're shooting at 1/4000th,
I cannot believe I looked all over the internet, could never find that
well,
answer.
now you know. All right, learning. That's what CBOG is all about. So 1/4000th of a stop. What is one stop darker than that? 1/8000. What's one stop lighter than that? 1/2000. So 1/2000. So this is the easiest one to understand, and you can keep doing this. 1/2000th, 1/1000th, 500, 1/250th. Eventually you get to the point where you're like half a second, 1 second, 2 seconds, 4 seconds,
And
8 seconds.
is it exponential? So would another stop down be from 1/4000th to be
1/8000.
No, I mean sorry. If we go 1 stop up, what would be 2 stops up?
Yeah. Yes. So 2 stops up from 1/4000th would be 1/1000th. So this is the mathematical term for this is the logarithmic.
Yeah,
And there's probably 80% of you guys know what that means better than I do. But basically,
I
it's like
don't
the
think that's
curve.
logarithmic. If it, I don't think. No, maybe you're right.
All right.
I'm confused.
Anyways, blah blah blah.
Stops are.
That's how you go up a stop or down a stop with exposure. What about aperture? Well, an aperture again is this circle. And how would you represent twice as much light? Well, you would do the mathematical formula to figure out the area of this circle, and then say, well, that's twice that. And essentially, you end up with this ratio of 1 to 1.4, I think. And so, one stop up from 1 is 1.4. One stop up from there, let me actually Google this.
Look at your lens.
Huh?
Just look at your lens.
Oh, yeah. Well, the thing is, like, they do it mathematically kind of funky.
Well, they
So-
have half stops and quarter stops.
Yeah. But I do think... Well, I want it to be visible on the recording, so I'm going to do it over here. So again, we can just go to Wikipedia, and you can look up this stop.
One of the other things that affects light is your lens.
Yeah.
You have a large aperture lens, it'll let in more light.
Mhm. Yep, and then
About expanding by the square root of 2, aren't you?
yeah. So you can see how there's a mathematical way it goes out. F2.8, F4. And then eventually you get to what's F8 times 1.4? Alright, what's that? 1.4 times 1.4 equals 1.96, which over here they're rounding up to 2, right? So 1.4 times 2 is 2.8, which, there it is. 2.8 times 1.4 is 3.92, which they round up to 4. Does that make sense? So, again, they go back and forth just like they do with shutter speed. But the important thing to know is they're trying to go for half as much light or twice as much light. That pen go. And the last one is ISO, which I think you can just double like the other one. So it starts off at 100 ISO sensitivity. You can double that to make it more light, to 200, to 400, to 800. But generally that's the last one you want to touch, because as you increase it, it gets noisier and noisier. So, all right, that's a basic understanding of stops. So why do we do HDR instead of just a photograph? The reason is because we're trying not to capture the background image. We're trying to actually capture the light of this scene. And this is where HDR and bracketing comes in. If I just take one picture of the outdoors, and the clouds in this picture are totally overexposed and the sky is pure white, chances are we're going to have lots of nice details in the shadows of the walls and the cracks and stuff. And that's because we're exposing for the darkest range of this. I could also shoot this so that the clouds have all this crispness, the blue of the sky is visible compared to the white of the clouds, and that's a lighter exposure. So that range of dynamic range has expanded to the darks, the midpoint of lights. I can then expand it so that the clouds are very dark and gray, but the sun stands out as this bright white beacon compared to the clouds. So that ratio of light of cloud versus sun and cloud versus wall is the range of the photo. And a single photo can't really capture it all. But with HDR we can. And what we do is we take a bracket photo that jams all of these into one giant photo. And I can do that right now in this room. So, you know, again, on DSLR controller, you get this little menu, and you can go into settings, bracketing, and then you can select how you want to bracket this. So if I do shutter speed, I just say how many stops, 2 exposure values or 2 stops. That would mean that it's going to go from 2,000 to 1,000 to 250, and I can say the number of stops. So, blah, blah, blah. And I think like it's going positive, so I have to start at a very low range because it's going to go up or positive from there. So I'll set this to 1/4000, f22, which is the darkest it gets. And now I'm going to hit, again, settings, HDR, exposure bracketing, shutter speed, 2 steps each time. It's going up 8 stops. And it'll tell you what the lowest range and the highest range are here. So again, it's starting off at 1/4000th shutter speed. And it's going 2 exposure values or 2 stops every time 9 times. So the longest exposure is going to be 15 seconds. And let's try this. Go. And then it does it. And what's beautiful is I'm not touching this. Another thing worth investing in for your camera equipment if you're doing this is a high-speed memory card. You'll notice that there's a slight pause as it's getting these. That's because it's writing these huge camera raw files, and so eventually it's like, I can't deal with this, so I have to take a little pause. This is the 15-second exposure.
So do you always go from the highest to lowest range, or would it be a good idea to try and
So
just go as far as you need to and not get a whole bunch of pure white?
So here's my current process. I start at the lowest exposure because a lot of times when I've been doing this, I've been working on this sort of science project of capturing the sun's value. And so I'm trying to go dark, 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 and then add sunglasses on top of this. So I end up putting 3 different neutral density filters in here and then taking them out one at a time. And each one represents 3 stops of darkness. So I take one out, I've gone down 3 stops. I take one out, I've gone down 3 stops. I take one out, I've gone down 3 stops. And from there, I start shooting brackets at 3 stops each time.
So you're going to make us a full HDR C-bug.
Yeah. So I might be able to show this. Maybe not. And I broke that. So I'll try and get this on the web camera. Oh, never mind. Had the lens cap off. Anyways, whatever. I'll just show you my pre-made ones.
I'm still waiting for them to be shooting a Michael Bay movie and blow up $2 million worth of cars and be like,
Chip, we weren't running.
yeah.
It's probably happened.
What's the name of that program, Oscar? You have on your...
On my phone?
Yeah.
DSLR controller. And again, you know, if you're curious, if you need to take notes on this, just go to my blog, ogbog.net. I've got most of it written down. So DSLR controller for Android. I'm going to add some copy photos and make this a little zazzed up later. But, there's the start of this. So if we look at some older shots of mine, I shot these, I think, with a dirty lens, so they're not perfect. But we can see the output that we get here. One sec. Okay, my passport. So here's the JPEGs of this shot. And this was actually shot without neutral density filters, and you can immediately see the problem here. The sun is exposed at the same amount as its rays. And if properly shot, we should have a point where the ratio of light is the pinprick of sun versus pure darkness everywhere else. Instead, we're still getting clipping. Clipping is when the whites or the blacks go away because you shot it too low or too dark. And there you can start seeing the lens dirty lens. So I actually, like Dean was saying, you know, where do you start, where do you end? I did shoot this basically at the darkest level, and then I was like, I don't know where I want to end it. Let's go way over. This does cause problems later when you try to bracket it. And so what you want to do is, if you are familiar with cameras at all, there's a mean with which you can, I forget what it's called, metering your light, where you figure out how light or dark it is. It's got the little slider on the bottom, and it tells you if it's overexposed or underexposed.
I think that's just called the meter.
I think it's just called metering, right? Like I know anything about photos. So essentially what you want to do is meter your scene towards the darkest part of it. So if you know you're trying to capture the lightest part, and you just shoot super dark, and you shoot with neutral density filters, that's one end. And on the other end, you want to shoot towards the darkest thing. So on a sunny day when you're outside and part of your shot is like the deep dark window of an abandoned shack, that would be what you try to meter towards as the high end. So your high end should be that level of exposure, or perhaps a little more. Sometimes I'll just do this though, and I'll say, well, 3 stops each time until like I can't go anymore, and eventually you get a shot like this, which is pretty worthless, right? So in my experiment stitching this, I got the best results by cutting off this, and I think this one. So cutting off 3 of these. Maybe. Because eventually, like, you get, you can't even see the darks here because there's too many light rays. Then I have another angle, and another angle, and another angle.
Where did you shoot this?
I think it was at Magnuson Park. There's one other piece of equipment you might need to do, which is get a Macbeth chart. Does anyone know what that is? A Macbeth chart.
I think the little square.
It's just a square chart that has all your basic colors. So if you're in a room that has blue lighting, a Macbeth chart lets you say, well, what does gray become? What does a neutral idea of gray become in this lighting? What does a neutral idea of red become? And so what this lets you do is, if you have this Macbeth chart shot to your environment, this might inform things like how do you match the diffuse color of a CG car so that it matches the CG car, or the real life car that was the same red. You know the swatch color of paint on the red car, you know it on the Macbeth chart, you sample both, and you know that even though it's blue lighting, this is your red in the real world. And also it lets you select the gray, and this changes white balance. So there's good stuff like that. So you're going to end up with 2 big piles from your camera. You got it up?
Yeah, have Thanksgiving.
You too. So you're going to end up with 2 things. One is your JPEGs, and one is your camera raw. You will almost certainly make lots of mistakes as you shoot these. I have shot many highly successful, in theory, HDRs, and then got home to realize I only shot in JPEG, or some other silly mistake. And you also get these giant files called CR2s, or camera raw.
2.
Canon RAW 2. That's what it stands.
Camera raw 2.
Canon.
So here's all my CR2s. And depending on your program, it may or may not be able to use this. So I actually use another program called DC Raw, and this is just a tiny little shell script that dumps photos out of a camera raw file. So, if you're a Linux person, you can probably find a smarter way to do this, but this is the easiest way I've been able to find it. You want to download not the actual C script, you want to download the dcraw.exe.
By the way, the Windows Photo Viewer can open roles.
Yeah, I saw that.
No, I mean the old, not the nasty modern app one. The old one can as well.
Anyways, some of these people, somebody on the internet has a compiled version of DC Raw, and that's the one I recommend using.
Modern apps are evil.
Again, this is vaguely Blender related, I assure you, because eventually you throw this into a 3D scene. But if you hate photography, I'm sorry, this is super boring. So,
The flat notes.
over here, what I can do is go. I'm just going to copy one of these to the desktop. I'll copy these 2. Or rather.
Yeah, I want Windows 10 because of the new desktop. So I have to hack above it installed.
You guys are crazy. Why does everyone hate Windows 10? I love it.
Well, I just don't. It doesn't have any features that I want in it.
I dig it, man.
It's called security updates.
Yeah, Windows 7 is still going to be security update.
You know what I loved about Windows 10? I could insert my micro SD card, and it actually already had the driver for it. So let's say I have this file. I can change my directory to
Also, it gives data.
desktop.
I have a virtual machine running Windows 10, and I was really angry when I get numerous pop-up notifications. Like, you can get more with Office 365. Don't you dare put advertising on my desktop. That's frustrating.
Doesn't know what.
No. No, I mean,
Or like the back for Windows 10 they put in. I don't know if you got it. I don't know if there's a Windows 10.
All right. I don't know how to do it on these computers because everything is run off the server. So navigating directories is really hard for me. But essentially what you end up doing is
Like there's certain like Microsoft versions of that. The one that they use.
if I just drag this in here, you can kind of see the effects of it.
I think it's hilarious how Solitaire has that.
You'll notice if I run this, it has all these commands.
You can pay to okay.
And what you end up doing is dcraw.exe, V for verbose, capital T for TIFF output, 4 for linear 16-bit, which means that it's not going to modify this on a color curve at all, or a value curve. And then sometimes I use H for half size image.
that file.
And then you're going to use star to do all of them at once. So if I did this, it would go through and grab every single one of these and basically output these TIFFs. So these are TIFFs. And the reason you use TIFFs is they still have all the color values and... Shut up, Windows 10. Wait, this is Windows 8 still. So they have the color value, and more importantly, it has the camera information still. So then we start using a program called Hugin. Again, this is long, and you're using lots of different programs, but stay with me. Again, Hugin is a panorama stitching software, and it can also automatically do HDR. There's two different pipelines I've used in the past. One is using Hugin to do my stitching, but using a different program called PictureKnot to do my bracketing. So I take my brackets, I stick them in PictureKnot and smash them into single pictures. I then use Hugin to stitch those brackets together. The other thing you can do is just do it all in Hugin. Hugin can't see CR2 files, but it can see TIFFs. So that's one reason you might want to do it in PictureKnot. You can end up only having 4 photos to stitch rather than 4 photos times 9 brackets. But just to show you the basic interface here. If you go Interface, Advanced, you get this fancy stuff. And first thing you're going to do is add all your images. So if I go to my E drive first. Ooh, running off an external. Good idea, right? You can see I have lots of old stuff that I've stitched that's kept around. I can go and grab all my TIFFs. And it should automatically detect the stacks. Alright, so this is a slightly older version of Hugin. The new one automatically detects from the file data what your lens is. If you're not sure, you should definitely look it up and make sure you know you're on camera. So I think this is a equisolid angle lens. When I say fisheye, that's what it's actually referring to. My field of view, I believe, let me see. I think if I enter focal length multiplier, it'll automatically get it. So it knows that it's 8 millimeter. And I think the focal length is actually like 1.52. Something like that. But 1.6 will work. And then it'll automatically detect that these are in a stack together. So you'll notice you can go grouped by stacks, and now I can see them. The first thing we have to do is figure out how to stitch these together. So I'm just going to use create control points, and this will run a little script, and start figuring out how to connect these together. I have generally found that Hugin is smart enough that although you can go into a manual interface to modify your own control points, you're probably better off just doing it automatically. And if you don't get results using automatic, it means you shot it wrong. It's your own fault. So you'll notice this added a bunch of control points, and it's on specific images. It's using this one, and this one. And it's assuming these are sort of parent images for the rest of the ones in the stack. If you go into the control points, we can sort of see this, I think. So you'll notice it's got 15 points that it's connected to. And it's trying to figure out how this 7 point is connected to this 7 point. So on and so forth. This all looks pretty good to me. Next I hit calculate, and it's going to use those points to jam this into an overall mapped stuff. Oh, I think I actually have to do one other thing. If you go to GL Preview under Assistant, you actually want to use this button, Align. And again, this is open source software. It's free. That's really awesome. But it does mean it gets a little clunky at times. So there's no Align button on the advanced interface. So if I align this, it's going to start figuring out how this shot that's in the center has the sun. There's an angle next to it that's connected on this side, and then in the back. Blah, blah, blah. And eventually this is going to give us an output that looks like this, right? Clearly we're not going to be done yet, though.
Yeah,
But you can see how this is connected. And this is where a Macbeth chart comes in handy. If I have a Macbeth chart that's in this photo somewhere, I can just color pick off of that to pick a gray, and it'll use that as a basis for the rest of the scene. So I think I get better results when I color pick off this sidewalk as gray than this one turned out. Because clearly it's just trying to eyeball it. So a Macbeth chart is pretty good for that reason. And
So
you
I'm curious, the colors looked fine in the photos before it got its hand on them, and then it takes them and then it messes up the colors.
Yeah, it's because it's trying to use linear data, and I don't know. It's a complex problem. I don't know. But eventually I did get one that I think turned out correct. Let's see if I can find it.
You can, there's a search thing, search. You can type in the search box HDR.
So this one is an example of where I color picked. But I think I'm getting noise because I included those high exposure ones. So I think the newest one I have at home fixes it, but that's because I cut those out.
Still want to see it cast a shadow.
Yeah. Well, you'll notice that, again, I didn't use neutral density filters in this, so it's not going to because it didn't get a low enough ratio. For it to cast a shadow, it needs a ratio that says the sun is 1,000,000 times brighter than everything else in your scene. Eventually, if you start thinking about this, you get kind of zen about light, and you're going to start noticing something, which is a car has a cast shadow and an ambient occlusion shadow up just because something is under it, right? You'll be able to start noticing the instant a cloud is in front of the sun, even if you're not looking at the sun, because you're going to be looking at cars, and the cast shadow fades because the overall ratio of light of the sky and the environment versus the sun just goes from 1,000,000 versus everything else to 10,000 versus everything else. And that's enough to mean that you don't cast a shadow. There's enough light pollution just from that. It's very strange and kind of
So
cool.
you said you had one that casts shadows.
Yeah, let me see if I can find it.
You can actually store things in the documents folder.
Can you
Yeah,
just
what-
create a black
That was
plate
his
with a white dot?
document, my documents from the old computer like that.
Huh?
Can you create a black plate with just a white dot?
I think you can. I mean, I think you can actually just print out a Macbeth chart, and that'll work.
You have to create your shadows.
No, and I'll show you why. So, again, this is not exposed correctly because we don't have the lowest values. But you'll notice something, which is that if I click on this, we're still getting very strange RGB values down there. It's 17, 44, and 38. If you shoot this correctly, it should say that this white piece of paper is at, it's not illuminated, so it's 0.5, 0.5. This cell phone that you're holding up that actually is casting illumination is 111. And this sun right here, this pinprick of sun, is like 10,000 red, 10,000 green, 10,000 blue. And again, I think I actually
But
can...
then just asking, why can't you just go in Photoshop and then make those pixels
You
10,000?
can't in Photoshop, but you can in Krita. And that's really, really fun.
Oh, so you can actually.
Yeah, so if you have one that has the picture values accurately mapped, and you can look at this and say, 10,000 versus... one second.
You could probably do that in Blender too. Just there's a way to put a white dot in your texture.
No, it's brighter than white.
I mean, a white
Yeah.
a dot of depth of color, and then you can make it super white.
Yeah, so look at this one. This is like a super small one, and I didn't white balance it. But look at the RGB values. 16,000 red, 10,000 green, 53,000 blue. So let's use that.
That actually might be correct because the sun doesn't give out
Yeah, the sun
correctly
isn't-
white light.
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't. So let's try this
We have a
in our 3D scene. Look at that.
Make sure there now. Oh, there's a sun there.
What's with the exposure set at -7 down?
Oh, one sec. I'm going to speed this up.
Good.
Cue the music. And the cycle setting. Sampling.
Isn't there like a checkbox, the one that Andrew Price can never be quiet about, that gets rid of half noise?
You mean the clamping?
Or the multiple important sampling or whatever?
Yeah.
The little setting somewhere on the texture.
Oh.
I don't watch Andrew Price's stuff.
Why not?
But he does follow me on Twitter, which is cool.
So you can see that this is casting a shadow, right?
Yeah, I've met him.
Do you see the shadow? Acknowledge my shadow. Right there.
Shadow! Finally!
Yes. It's got a shitload of noise, but it does have a shadow. So, again, if you have your ratio correctly, and I still don't think I went dark enough in this, you do get a shadow. I think this is actually, let's get another one.
Yeah, I watch this podcast while
You guys know I'm recording this and I'm going to put it out there. And so Andrew Price is going to see us all bad-mouthing and he'll start crying.
I think you're
Why
probably the
does
only one
Seattle
that's
hate me?
the sound of.
Oh, I love Andrew Price.
Yeah, if he does listen, we don't mean it.
He's an excellent person.
We just make fun of you because
Andrew
you're
Price.
successful.
Everyone say, happy birthday, Andrew Price. Oh yeah.
Wait, has the camera been pointing there the whole time?
Yeah, I think it was pointed at my camera.
Does anyone actually watch this?
Yeah.
Is the lens cap?
I've got
on?
like 16 followers on Twitter. So again, I click view as render, and that means this image will be subject to my viewport exposure setting. So now if I go down here,
Put it to 1.
I can set it to -10. I can actually make it even darker by using curves. And now you can see how those light rays that you see that are the same white as your sun are a lie. This one even has bigger values because On that small one, it was blurring it where it was still 1 pixel. This one has 26,000 red.
I think you can go.
Can you put the exposure back to normal? I want to see it rendered just normally. Wait, why does it look like it's a whiteout? You know?
So this is an aspect that I'm still occasionally.
Oh, it's calibrating the.
Yeah, like how do you output it so that if you can have a 32-bit file that represents over here like 0.0001 and over here a million, how do you calibrate that on your output so that it says this is the default of 0? And
Yeah, you divided it, wouldn't you? Like just.
I'm
Oh,
sure,
yeah.
I'm sure there's a way to do that.
And you can see that this was before I was totally hip to the idea of using grays to using a Macbeth chart or something where you sample your white balance to get your colors right.
Yeah, that's about right. A little less. There we go. Shadow.
It takes forever, but there's a shadow
It's fairly soft.
in your
though,
face, jerks.
From
Yeah.
the scene being fairly. And you didn't do it as high as you.
Well, looking at the shadows in the rest of the scene, it needs to be a little harder and more intense. But
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. It's like you can compare right here, and that doesn't mean that the shadow isn't there. It means that I still have to add more of those little gel filters in my camera to get this
Or you
shot
can just do
correctly.
it
You know.
manually afterwards. You can figure out what the sun.
I mean, you could, like in theory, you could figure this out by just typing in random values. I'm not sure how to like Krita is the only program I know that lets you
You could do it
paint in
Blender.
HDR.
You could do it in Blender using nodes. You could
Uh-huh.
modify the.
Yeah, well, yeah, like if over a certain value, make it twice as bright. I don't know.
No. Just use the one of those procedural outputs there, the circle, and then if you map it right to the world, you can and shrink it with color ramps. You can make a little dot and then move it around.
Oh yeah, that's an idea. So just to show you, I don't know if Krita is on here. Nope. Oh. So Krita lets you actually color pick 32-bit floating point values, and then you can use it as a brush setting. So I've done this with stuff is color pick the sun's value, darken everything, and then just use a thin ink brush in Krita and draw like a zigzag sun, and it totally works. It lights it like that, and it's very exciting. By which I mean not exciting at all. So let's check on Hugin. All right, so I hit go, and now it's sort of at the point where it's mapped these. If I just select some of the core ones,
The correct.
you can see how this kind of is all there, right? So now there's more stuff that I still need to do to make this correct. When in doubt, doing HDR stuff, you always want linear. Linear. And the reason for that is that imagine everyone is shooting on cameras like live action footage or something, and they hand that off to somebody else, and you're the one guy who had your settings different. All of a sudden, your footage of the actor is not going to look the same as everyone else's. So
Which would be good if you color correction.
what you want to do is on here, set the photometric option to custom parameters, and then under exposure on your camera, right click and say edit image variable, camera response, set it to linear, and hit OK.
You got some of the noise in there, it looks like.
Yes, I did. Oh, and notice one other thing, which is I think I have to, maybe we can see it here. So you can see that I wasn't going on direct amounts of, I think this was at like 2.1 per bracket. So you can see that this goes up in exposure of 2.1. This one goes up a little more, and a little more, and a little more.
I wonder if you could get it to how many even iterations.
Yeah, you can do that in DSLR controller. You can just say, I know what my highest exposure is. I know my lowest exposure is as dark as the black eyes of Satan, and somehow just iterate between that, and it'll give you some funky number like 2.2 per stop, right? Or 2.2 stops per bracket. So if I have all this, now I go to Stitcher, and I'm going to do I recommend doing small sized ones to start with, like, I don't know, 512 by 256. And I want to output this as a high dynamic range. Let's just stitch this, save to the desktop, because that is always the best practice. And it's going to boop, 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 boop.
It's so bad you can't put it on the desktop with desktop and you have all this stuff in.
For a while now, I've been saving everything on my backup, or just in my user directory. So it only goes in documents, videos, movies, pictures, like that. Because that way, I know that if I get a new computer or if I do a clean install, I like having no programs installed so I can do clean installs of everything. So I'll get new Blender, new Hugin, new this, new that, and then I just duplicate all my files over rather than all the programs, or like a full image of my computer.
Well, my
And
solution has been to keep all my
in the desktop, all on the desktop.
Not all my personal stuff off the C disk because I'm on Windows, and then just have a different drive for it, and that way I can wipe the C disk whenever I feel like it.
Or
Ah.
partition.
Recover. Oh, partition. Well, if you have one disk partition, but I have more than one disk anyway.
Anyways, this is a very personalized setting to me, and it's not very fair to assume other people. Thanks for coming. You get extra credit.
My computer's hardware.
But it's not necessarily fair for me to expect other people to know that. So I told my wife, "Can you back up my computer?" And she did she searched Windows backup and did a whole image of my computer and totally bricked a hard drive.
Oh,
of
do
mine.
you still have that one? Or?
Yeah. Do you know how to fix it?
Yeah. That's
Okay, good.
Pretty easy, I think. If you
Alright,
use
there's
G-parted on Linux.
G-parted?
Yeah.
On Linux? Okay. Alright. And you're my fact-checking guy. So Hugin, I think it's still going.
Does it still recognize?
Batch successfully completed. So now we can open this. Where did I save it? Desktop. And there it is, a little EXR. And you can see that this has some big problems. So these problems are specifically because I shot with lots of overexposure. So it's trying to figure out, well, if this is everything is white and pure nonsense, and this is also white, how do I make those go together? It really doesn't understand anymore.
Use the
I'll do this.
color palette.
But you'll notice that it does have a sun value that's kind of interesting. But again, I don't have, what's it called? I don't have the ones that were shot with neutral density filters on there, so it's not perfect. So if I want, I think I can actually go in.
Why
And just-
why is it that these things never work right? It's like you have all the stitching programs and they come out and they're just not right. I mean, even when you've done the suns correctly, it's too dark or too bright. The colors are messed up.
Because color is hard.
Because you shot it wrong.
So in theory, if I delete some of these,
Or you can always blame it on Windows.
Unless you're using Linux.
Blame it on Linux.
Oh, you can blame it on a certain control. Like Ubuntu.
ugh.
You can always blame it on something other than yourself.
I don't think this is going to shoot right. This is another reason I want to upgrade to a full frame sensor. By shooting at 90 degrees rather than 120 degrees. So I usually start with my mnemonic being the sun is in the shot. What this means though is that my 45 or my 90 degree turn, the sun is still in the shot, And just the presence of the sun means that it's going to black everything out, or it's going to blow everything out with white. And it's also going to create lots of light cookies and, you know, lens errors. So I really want it to be one shot has the sun, and then two other angles that have nothing to do with the sun. So, I don't know. That's HDR shooting in a nutshell, and you know, you can see the value of it in 3D because you get an instant fancy sky. And I think there's a way you can do the same stuff in you know, the default Blender render. You just end up doing things like, why would you?
Blender render. Everyone thought it's faster, but when you try and actually do what you do with cycles with the Blender render, it's horribly slow.
Well, it can be faster.
Again, Blender's current development map is that they're never going to work on internal again. They're just going to make cycles mimic previous internal features.
That's changed a bit, I think.
Do they?
I think
The people.
The latest open movie that was released, like, that was a few minutes long, was rendered completely in the viewport.
yes, that one. I love the viewport rendering. I use it all the time.
Yeah, you can use it kind of if you.
I think you got to get a plug-in.
It has kind of a map path.
Well, I mean, I just never did it.
All right.
If you're doing cartoony stuff.
So that's HDR for now. Any questions? No? This is totally. It's a fun little documentary tiptoe into a new subject.
Just next time, bring us free working HDR handouts.
I don't know. I should just start.
Scripted on paper.
Yeah.
So we're
Okay.
gonna have
See you
another C-bug next month?
Yes, we will have a CBug in December, and then we won't have one in January because, you know, Christmas, New Year's.
So
We're all gonna be too tired, right?
For everybody who attends next month, I have a Christmas present.
Yeah. It's bringing us.
I've got the 3D
Googly
glasses,
goggles.
but I decided to save them as a Christmas present for next month's demo.
Really,
As in,
They're old
Canada,
school
Canada.
anaglyph.
Oh, right, yes, yes.
Yeah, something like that.
I
All right.
a pair of Amazon, they're terrible.